Hello viewers, welcome to a program on communication. Communication has been an important aspect for all creatures in their daily lives. And we have realized through the years how communication has played a vital role in the progress of various aspects of our lives. Take for instance our civilization, welfare, work atmosphere, relationships, and in various other aspects where we find relevance of. Today, as we move towards busier and faster modes of living in prospect of achievement, progress, and harmony, it would be worthwhile now to gear up with the most essential tool that would eventually carry us through to success. This program on communication is a lecture given by Professor B.M. Dheer. The program is divided into 3 parts. So let us get started with the first part of this program, where we shall be dealing with 2 important aspects. Firstly, the importance of communication. How important is communication in our daily lives? Secondly, we shall be looking at communication as a process. So let us now listen to Professor Dheer.
Good morning to you. The session today deals with a very important topic, and the topic is communication. We will have a very interactive session because I think that's the best way to learn about communication. And in communication, I will let you know what are the main points for interaction. Firstly, in communication, we will deal with the importance of communication. What is it that makes communication so very important? So, the main topic, communication, the first point for interaction, we will deal with the importance of communication. After we have discussed about the importance, we will go on to the process of communication. How does communication take place, and what are the different elements in the communication process? After dealing with the process of communication, we will briefly talk in terms of certain characteristics of communication. See, the reason is that we have a certain model which depicts the communication process. It has certain elements, and the model is interactive, but the model is somewhat incomplete. The reason is because communication is a very dynamic process, and so we will talk in terms of certain characteristics of communication which describe this dynamic nature of communication. Then we will also briefly touch upon the different types of communication. We will conclude the session by discussing what might be some guidelines for making our communication more effective, right? So, in the end, we will deal with certain guidelines for effective communication. Now, coming to the very first point, the importance of communication. See, you will all agree that in any work situation, in any job setting, job-related knowledge and skills are indeed very, very essential for achieving success. but you will also agree that success to a very large extent is dependent on effective communication. That is, how good are we at communicating with other people? And you will also find that on an average, any professional or any business executive in your own setting, he would spend something like 75 to 80% of his time communicating. Now, have you ever wondered why is it that communication is so important? What is it that makes communication so very vital, so very important for success? I thought we can have your responses.
It makes the things clear, and clear picture is very clear.
Okay, so one response is that one requires communication for clarity. Any other comment?
So messages are conveyed.
For conveying or for sending messages. Okay, we also have a very interesting comment, and the comment is, if there is no communication, there would be no business. Okay, can you elaborate that? Perhaps what you are trying to say is that at every stage in any business venture or in any business enterprise, you have to talk in terms of developing a product. You have to convince people why that product is superior to some already available or existing product. So it's a question of producing the product, it's a question of convincing people, it's a question of telling and selling. Okay?
Or we can say the same line in that communication is a nervous system of every business.
Okay, so that even goes one step further and says that it's the nerve center, of any business enterprise. Now, apart from telling and selling, you also require communication for understanding. Okay, you do require communication also for decision making. Why? Because in any decision making activity, you have to have a certain amount of information. And when you look for information, you have to elicit this information from various sources. So obviously, communication is required. Right, so we have 3 points. You require communication to be able to say exactly what you want to say, clarity. You want to send some message across to somebody else, so you require communication. And of course, we have that communication is very essential for any successful business enterprise, because we need communication to tell people, we need communication to sell things, we need communication to understand certain problems, to solve problems, and we need communication very much, obviously, for decision making, which is a very vital function of management. Any other response? Any other response? I think you've done very well. Okay, let me sum this up. Apart from whatever we have got here, let me put it in some kind of a sequence. Whether we are talking in terms of our own business setting, or we are talking in terms of any organizational setting, communication is important. The importance of communication because of a number of reasons. Let me just sum them up. Firstly, communication is essential for giving instructions. Okay? In any enterprise, you have to give a large number of instructions. So communication is very vital from this point of view. Apart from giving instructions, we require communication to get along with people. Okay? You have to carry the subordinates along with you. So this requires communication. So not only giving instructions, getting along with people. one person, one individual may have a certain idea, and he is interested in sharing this with other colleagues, sharing it with superiors, sharing it with the subordinates. So how do you share your experiences? How do you exchange ideas? You can do this only through communication. So communication is also important because it is essential for sharing ideas and experiences. Right? Now, many a time in our work setting, we have to explain precisely a certain job function, a certain task, okay? The details of a particular function which an individual is supposed to perform. Now, how do you do that? Explaining all these things, that is, explaining the details of any job, the details of any task, or the function to be performed by any individual, this also requires the use of communication. So, explaining any job, any function, or any task, this requires the use of communication. Invariably, we have to make a presentation regarding any new product, or we have, we wish to launch a particular scheme, or we want to undertake a certain project for which we have to make some kind of a presentation. Now, even for making such presentations, for obtaining the clearance of the competent authority, for having the kind of approval or go ahead green signal, you require communication. So all kinds of presentations. Presentations for new products, presentations for new projects, for new schemes, where you want approvals and you want perhaps, the budgetary okay or the budgetary approval. So you require communication for doing that. Another very important area in management concerns problems. One has to understand problems. Now, how do you understand problems? You understand problems by talking to people, by listening to them. So communication is an integral part of understanding problems. Communication is also very vital for solving problems, because as successful business people or as successful entrepreneurs, it is not enough only to understand a problem. It is equally important to find the right kind of solution in the smallest possible time frame. So understanding problems and solving problems, this requires communication. So communication is important even from this standpoint. That is, understanding and solving problems. Last but not the least, in any enterprise, in any human endeavor, which is a collective effort, you have to have a very high degree of coordination. What is coordination? Coordination is ensuring that people do not work at cross purposes, but they apply all their efforts in the given broad direction for achieving your organizational goals and objectives. So, communication is very essential for achieving a high degree of coordination. Now that we have dealt with the importance of communication, let's go on to the second aspect, and that deals with the communication process. The elements in the communication process are, there has to be a sender and there has to be a receiver. Okay, very good. So we have One of the elements has the sender, the other element is the receiver. Can you think of any other element?
Some way of interaction.
And media.
Medium.
Very good, very good. One response is that message is very important. In any communication process, there has to be a message. What is it that we wish to communicate? What is it that we wish to transmit? You see, from our end to the receiver. So the message has to be there. And as somebody rightly said, the other response is there has to be some kind of a medium. And in our jargon, we call it as the channel of communication. So we sometimes also refer to it as the transmission channel. So you have to have a transmission channel. We've done very well so far. Can you think of any other elements which may be there in this kind of a system? You had made reference to a very important element, feedback. Because it's not as if the receiver is passive. The receiver is not a passive sponge. Okay? He is responding, he is reacting. So you have another important element, that is feedback. How is a message? See, where does the message originate? Come on, it's not that difficult. Where does the message originate? Where does it begin? Where is the source of the message? Source of the message is the mind of the sender. There is a certain idea in his mind. There is a certain thought in his mind. And he wishes to share that idea with the receiver. So this is the starting point, the origination of that message. Now this thought which is there in his mind, what happens to it? It has to be transformed. It has to be changed. How is that change taking place? That change is taking place through the encoding process. Encoding process. What is this encoding? Let me just explain to you. Whatever thought originates in the mind of the sender, that is converted, that is expressed in terms of certain words or in terms of certain symbols. So the thought may be verbalized. This is what we call as encoding. The thought which is there in our mind, how do you express it? We invariably express it by using words, and we also express it by using symbols. So that idea, when it is encoded, it becomes the message. Now as soon as the receiver, he gets this encoded message, exactly the reverse process must take place. See, because if we have said, offering a two-storied, one-canal bungalow in Chandigarh, okay, at a price of, say, 26 lakhs, confirm acceptance. Now all these words, as soon as these are received at the receiver's end, these words are again decoded. Okay? All these things, they mean certain things. So the message has to be made meaningful. And what is the process? The process of trying to assimilate what is there in the message in terms of words and symbols, it is converted back again into the same kind of process whereby the receiver understands what exactly the message is which has been sent to him. So the reverse process of encoding takes place, it is decoding. That is, the words and the symbols are converted back into the original idea. So decoding. See, the manner in which we are discussing it, it looks so simple. It is over simplistic. It means that the receiver, he receives exactly what we intend him to receive. Does that happen in real practice? It doesn't. You had a small exercise before we started the formal interaction with you, and you found that there is a lot of communication gap. There is a lot of distortion. And why is that distortion taking place? that distortion is taking place because of the element of noise. The element of noise. Now, I will briefly explain that the noise is not only the physical noise. See, like the noise, the sound of the traffic on the road, which can be heard inside an office room, and it creates, it interferes with understanding what the other person may be trying to tell us, okay? Because it is a distraction. That sound of the traffic on the road, which is being heard inside a conference room, is distracting. So this is a physical noise. But noise can also be physiological. For example, if I am suffering from a severe headache and you are trying to tell me something, you're trying to pass on a message to me, because of the physiological noise, that is the headache, I may not be able to concentrate and may not be able to receive your message. So the noise may be physical, it may be physiological. Apart from that, the noise may also be psychological. I may be having a certain bias. I may be having a very strong prejudice, okay? I may have some fear. Some fear may be there, manifestation. And I may be preoccupied. These are all this kind of a noise is categorized as the psychological noise. And what is noise doing? Noise is distorting the message. And of course, apart from that, the ninth element also is very important. It is called as the environment. Now this environment is not necessarily only the physical environment. An environment in what context? Environment of the sender and environment of the receiver. Not limited only to the physical environment, but also to things like the past history. That also is very important, because a message is sent by the sender in the context of his own environment, because that sender is a communicator who inhabits a unique environment. Now just like the sender inhabits a unique environment, so does the receiver. And because of a difference in the environment, there are chances that the perception would be somewhat different. So the message which was intended to be transmitted may not be received as it was intended. And this is another very important source of distortion. And this is why it creates misunderstandings. Now you see, if you go back, you will find that when people refer to communication, and the origin of communication is in the Latin word, okay, communicare, and that means to talk, to share. Initially it seems a very simple process, but in fact it is very, very complicated. Now I will give you a flow diagram which tells you how these various elements are really interconnected and how they are interacting, and how is it that by the use of these elements, in fact the process of communication is taking place. In other words, we are in a position to send a message from our side onto the receiver's end. Let me briefly draw a sketch and again go through the process, how exactly the whole thing takes place. See, you have the sender. Let me use symbols. This is the sender, the S is the sender. The idea originates in the sender's mind. And what does the sender do? This thought which is there in his mind, this idea which exists in his mind, it is verbalized. Okay? Let me say that this, whatever comes to his mind, he writes it in terms of words and symbols. This process is called as encoding. So the sender having the thought which is converted into words and symbols, this is the encoding part. Two elements taken care of. After encoding, this message, let me say this becomes the message now. this message is sent through the transmission channel. And transmission channel, the message then reaches the receiver. And who is the receiver? The receiver is the individual who notices and attaches some meaning to this message, to this stimulus. So, how does this message become meaningful to him? The message becomes meaningful only after receiving it, he decodes it. Okay? So, decoding is taking place here. And after decoding, there is a role reversal, because this person has to pass on the feedback to the person who initiated the message. So, what happens? This person now becomes the sender. This receiver now becomes the sender for giving the feedback, and whatever is the meaning which he has understood from the message which he received, okay, after decoding he has a certain understanding, and if he wants to give a feedback, whatever is his understanding, he again encodes it. Okay? So, this encoding takes place here in the reverse direction, and after encoding, this becomes the message which in fact is his feedback. Okay? This message is the feedback, and it has to go through again a certain transmission channel, and now the original sender, he becomes the receiver, and as soon as he receives the message, in order to attach meaning to it, he has to decode it. Where does the noise come in? Noise comes in all these elements, okay? And noise it has a distorting effect. This is the noise, and as I said earlier, the noise need not be limited only to the physical noise. You see, these lines that I have shown here, these are the noise lines. Okay? This is the representation of noise which is trying to interfere with the message right at the encoding, decoding stage, or at the transmission stage or at the receiving stage. These lines here, these are representing the noise, which is an interference. And the noise, I said earlier, noise can be either physical noise, and physical noise are for example, the external sounds. And the external sound is, say, the screeching of cars on the street, and some of that is coming in and is being heard in the conference room. It is distracting people. It need not be only an external sound. It may be a certain smell in a room. Somebody is smoking inside the room, and you find that the tobacco smoke is obnoxious. Even that is noise, in the sense that it interferes with you are concentrating on what is being transmitted onto you. The second kind of noise, so first is the physical, then is the physiological. Can you think of any example of the physiological noise? I gave you one example earlier on. I said somebody may be suffering from a headache, and that headache that he is suffering from, it is a physiological noise. Any disability can also be a physiological noise. For example, if I am hard of hearing, okay, if I am hard of hearing, that becomes a physiological noise because it will interfere in receiving the message properly. If I am not well, if I am having influenza, or if I am having a migraine kind of a headache, I will not be able to focus on what is being said. So these are examples of the physiological noise. So the message which is being transmitted, you're not really receiving it as such, okay? What you are receiving is something that you wish to receive. And the reason is because you have a very strong bias, or you are nursing a prejudice, or there may be a feeling of fear, a fear psychosis, or another example is I may be preoccupied. Because I am preoccupied, somebody is, if I have to rush for a meeting and somebody comes to me and is trying to tell me something, you will find that you are not very receptive because your own preoccupation, and that is you have to attend an important meeting, that is trying to obliterate whatever the other person is saying. So you are not really receiving that. And this is called as the psychological barrier. Because of all this, communication, which is supposed to be a bridge of meaning, may not really serve that purpose. People normally say that communication is very important. People say that communication is very important. Why? Because it provides a bridge of meaning. It provides a bridge of meaning. And what is this bridge? People use this bridge, okay, to go across the river of misunderstanding and to meet people. But what happens? Because of the noise, etc., there may still be some part of that river of misunderstanding which remains uncrossed or uncovered. So communication then, in that case, would not be fully the bridge of meaning, because there is some gap in that. Okay? Now, you might ask me, where does the ninth thing fit into it? The ninth thing is the environment. As I said, environment is very important. And environment would be, this may be the environment of, let's call this sender, who ultimately becomes the receiver, as communicator A. And this then is the environment of communicator A. This is, communicator A inhabits this unique environment. And this unique environment is not only the physical environment, it is also his past history, as I have repeated earlier. And likewise, if I show dotted, this may be the environment which is unique to the receiver here. We call him communicator B. Is this clear to you? This model is called as the interactive model of communication. Interactive model of communication, because a person is receiving as well as sending messages simultaneously. Right, we've just talked about the communication process, and so we have covered point number 1 and point number 2. Habits this unique environment, and this unique environment is not only the physical environment, it is also his past history, as I have repeated earlier. And likewise, if I show dotted, this may be the environment which is unique to the receiver here. We call him communicator B. Is this clear to you? This model is called as the interactive model of communication. Interactive model of communication, because a person is receiving as well as sending messages simultaneously. Any questions or clarifications on the interactive model of communication, which tries to explain the process of communication?
Will you please elaborate the word you use, past history?
Past history is something like the frame of reference. You see, no two individuals are alike. The differences are because of the past experiences, the kind of mental structures which we already have, the kind of background we have, the social background, okay, the economic background, urban area, rural area, rich family, middle class family, okay, lower middle class family, and then the kind of mental structures which we have already developed, our own value system, our own needs, our own interests. Because of this, each one of us is supposed to have a unique frame of reference. So whatever we perceive it through our frame of reference. And the frame of reference becomes like your numbered glasses. You see everything through your numbered glasses. Like that, the frame of reference is like your personal, individual, numbered glass, so-called frame of reference. Because of that, the same stimulus may be received somewhat differently by two people. And I gave you a good example that if you are watching this very projector, the stimulus is the same, but because of your unique positions, you are seeing a different view, because each one of you is looking at the projector from a different angle. So some facets get highlighted, some facets are not highlighted. Similar thing happens in perception. All perception is selected. Any questions on this, the process? Okay.
Viewers, in this part of the program, we were able to recognize the various areas and activities where communication is applied. We also saw communication as a process where we dealt with the various constituents and factors which make up the process of communication. In the next part of the program, we will be looking at the characteristics of communication.